All right, this is one of my favorite topics in this particular section because there's not necessarily a whole lot of work involved, but so many people misuse and misrepresent statistics that I feel it's very, very important that we have a discerning eye. In the scripture, it encourages us to always seek the truth. And so, even in statistics, we need to make sure of a couple of things. First of all, when you're watching the news, recognize that the news media has an agenda. They're not just reporting the news. We all have personal biases. We all spin things to make us feel better or to look better or to get people to think what we want them to think. Whether we do it consciously or subconsciously is debatable. The variations of it, how much people do that, certainly does change depending on the individual. Some people do it a lot, some people just do it a little bit. Some people know they're doing it, other people don't realize that they're even doing it. So we want to make sure we have a discerning eye. So when you're watching the news and they show statistics and they show these graphs, I want you to be able to look for things that are very, very common in misrepresenting statistics because they often use graphs because we can grab a lot of information in a very short period of time using something that's pictorial. But you can also manipulate the numbers to make people think something is true when it's actually not true. Not all statistics are scientifically accurate, and many people use statistics to manipulate another person's way of thinking. I want you to avoid that, and I want you to be able to see that when it happens. There are, I would say, half of the graphics that you see on the national news misrepresent the statistics that they're supposed to be giving you the truth on. And I'm not exaggerating about that. Anytime there's a graph, it's just the way my mind works. I look for how are they manipulating the information. And nearly half the time, I can figure out that they are misrepresenting the information that they're supposed to be representing truthfully. It's scary. Some examples that you might see on a commercial. You may see the terms 3 out of 4 dentists recommend this brand of toothpaste or doing this. Well, 3 out of 4 dentists, what they want people to believe is that they've asked hundreds of dentists, and roughly 3 out of every 4 say they recommend that this brand of toothpaste be used. But in reality, what they may actually mean is they literally asked 4 dentists, and 3 out of those 4 dentists recommended this particular toothpaste. Now, what are those 4 dentists? Those 4 dentists may have been asked by the Colgate company, and the Colgate company may have gone to them because they've been sending them sample Colgates for the last 2 years, and so that's what they've been handing out. And so naturally, that's what they would recommend is the use of Colgate or Crest. And I'm not saying Colgate does that. Don't get me wrong. They're just using the national name brand to kind of indicate that this kind of stuff does happen. So if they don't say a number specifically, like we've asked thousands of dentists and 3 out of every 4 recommend, they're probably manipulating the statistics. Did they ask 10,000 dentists or did they only ask 4? How did they find their sample? Did they ask only men? Men think differently from women. And so you've got to be careful about how that sample was conducted. If they asked only men about cars, well, men tend to think differently about something like cars than women do. Did they ask mainly a certain age group? If you took a political survey and I wanted to find out about Social Security, well, I'm going to get drastically different answers if I'm asking people in age 60s, 70s than if I ask teenagers and 20-year-olds because they have a different way of thinking about Social Security. When I ask a teenager or a 20 something and they see FICA, my goodness, look how much FICA is taking out of my paycheck. Whereas if I ask a senior citizen, they're like, I need that Social Security. That's how I'm paying for my food and my clothing and all this other stuff. And so, yeah, we have different ways of thinking about Social Security or many other aspects based on the person's age. Did the work required exclude people? So, are they going into an area that by and large is going to eliminate certain types of individuals? If I'm taking a survey and I go around a neighborhood that is $1 million homes and I'm asking these millionaires, what do you think on this certain topic? They're probably thinking differently than if I go to the slum area and I go door to door in the slum area and ask the same question to those people. So did the work required exclude certain people? Did the area that I asked exclude certain people? How were they contacted? Were they contacted by mail? Were they contacted by a phone call, through the internet? Well, if I use mail, that in and of itself is probably going to start excluding certain types of people. It's going to exclude people who are very busy, because I'm not going to fill out that survey and they just trash it. It could exclude people who maybe don't have a regular home address, that they're just kind of wandering around. If I call on the telephone, a lot of people now have caller ID and they don't even answer the phone if they don't recognize the number. So I'm excluding all the people that are using caller ID. If I use the internet, I'm probably excluding a lot of the older folks. They're going to feel comfortable taking some of those surveys because they don't really feel comfortable on the internet. So you got to think about, how did they get their sampling? How do they get their information? Once they have it, many companies will say average. They'll talk about an average. Well, when we talked about averages, we said you could use the mean, median, mode, or even the mid-range to determine the average. So as an example, if a company owner has 42 years of experience and he has four salesmen working for him, one has 22 years, one has 10 years, one has 2 years, and another one has 2 years experience. Well, overall, you would say that his salesmen are fairly mediocre in their experience. I mean, he's got one that has 22 years, he's got one that has 10 years. That's not bad. But then he has a couple of newbies, another a couple of greenhorns, what we would say. If we use the mean, we take the 22, 10, 2, and 2, and we find the average, he gets 9 years. Ah, well, okay, that's not bad, but that's not great. Hey, but you know what? Sometimes when I'm at the store, I'm also acting as a salesman. I've got 42 years of experience. So if I include my numbers in there, now the average jumps all the way up to 15.6. Well, now it sounds like, wow, I have longevity in my industry, and we've got experience. We average 15.6 years of experience. If he uses the mode, he's only got 2 years of experience. Well, he may want to do that. He may want to use the mode if he's trying to get new people on. Hey, look, we're a fresh company. We're getting new people in all the time. Our average experience is only 2 years, so we're welcoming people that are fresh out of college, that are fresh into the market. Get their experience, get their ideas, get their the new evolving type of thing. So depending on what he wants, he could have 15.6 years average or a 2 year average using the same numbers. It's all dependent on what he wants. He could use the median, that would give him 10 years. If you use the mid range and included himself, now it's 22 years experience. Whoa. So by using the average, he can get as little of 2 years for the average or as many as 22 years for the average. It all depends on what he is wanting to advertise and what he wants people to think. Because technically, all of them are true. He cannot be sued for false advertising if he used any of those numbers. He would just have to prove, this is how I came up with the number. And statistically, the mean, median, mode, and mid range are all averages. And so he would be completely fine in a legal sense. How is the information presented? That's another thing that we use with ambiguous averages. For instance, if there's a political campaign and these two guys are running and maybe the incumbent is being run against, maybe the person running against that incumbent says, "Do you realize that this man increased our spending by $6 million?" $6 million sounds like a lot, but that incumbent may say, "Wait a second, I only increased spending by 3%." So it depends on what you want the people to think. Another very common misconception or misrepresentation of statistics is something called detached statistics. Our product contains half the calories. Well, half the calories of what? So it doesn't half the calories of the leading brand or half the calories. They've got to compare it to something. Even that half the calories of the leading brand, well, depending on what they consider leading. Are they considered leading because they have the most sales? Are they considered leading because they're the one that's most well known? Are they considered leading based on some other criteria that they consider to be a leader? Implied connections. Here's an example. Decreased TV viewing may be linked to higher grades in teens. That word may implies that there is no guarantee. Implied connections are everywhere, mainly because they have to be to avoid lawsuits. Too many lawyers in the world that would sue. So, for instance, even if you read a package of cigarettes, it says cigarette smoking may lead to lung cancer because it's not always true. There are people that smoke a pack a day for almost their entire life and they never get lung cancer. All right, and there are non-smokers that get lung cancer. However, it has been strongly linked that it increases your likelihood of getting cancer. Here's another example that deals with smoking. Quitting smoking could reduce the risk of lung disease such as lung cancer. Could. It does imply that there is no guarantee. Now, just because there's an implied connection does not mean you don't believe the statistics. I want to make sure that I'm clear on that. Just realize that sometimes companies will take advantage of those implied statistics to make you think that something's there when really there's not a whole lot of scientific evidence for it. Okay, when we covered graphs, several of you did not start at zero. And I put comments on your homework when I graded it that whenever you do a bar graph or a line graph, start at zero. And here's the reason why. I'm going to show you a comparison. Here on the screen, we have the percent on the road. Okay, how many cars are still on the road after 4 years or after 10 years? Okay, so they may say 90% of our vehicles are still on the road after 10 years. And so I've got SCA, the number one. We still have all these cars out on the road, 98%. And then you look at our next competitor, competitor number one, and they're below us. And it's below us by a significant amount. And then competitor number two, man, they're really behind us. Well, look at the scale. We started at 95. We're at 98. Our next competitor is at 97 and a half. They're only a half percent behind us. Even competitor two, that seems vastly behind us, is only at 96. If we were to change this and put it on a scale that starts at zero, this is what we would get. Now, you can tell that there's a difference between the red and kind of the brownish orangish color there. But you have to look really closely in order to see, well, is there a difference between the red and the green? Yeah, I guess there is a little bit. Okay, so it's all based on perspective, right? Percentage of cars produced in the United States is another example here. This goes from 1986 to 1991. And you see that and you're like, whoa, we're dropping fast. But look at the scale. It starts at 15 and goes up to 25. If we redo that graph and we start at zero and we go all the way up to 100, this is what our graph looks like. Now, are both graphs true? Yes, I graph the exact same information. So it all depends on what I want people to think. If I want people to think that, man, the U.S. car production is on a tailspin, it's dropping like a lead balloon, I would use graph one. If I wanted to maybe calm some people and say, hey, look, is it going down? Yes, but it's not drastic, right? There's nothing to be concerned about. Then I would use the second graph. They both show the same information. It's based off of what I want people to think. If we look at Super Bowl commercial cost for a 30-second Super Bowl commercial, I could misrepresent the information by using what we call a two-dimensional illusion. One of the things that I talked about with bar graphs is I stressed make sure you have an equal number of space in between and make sure all the bars have an equal spacing as well. So all the bars should be the same width. All of the space between the bars should be the same distance. Here in 1967, you can see the cost of a Super Bowl ad versus 1995. And okay, there is a significant difference. Now, I started at 0, so I'm not manipulating anything. However, if I use a three-dimensional concept, this is what it would look like. So I use the heights of those coins. Now, the coin kind of looks cool because we're talking about money. All right, yeah, that looks cool. But is there a coin in 1967? Oh, yeah, I guess there is down there. But then you see that big quarter, you know. And so what you have done in reality is you've expanded the the size and the way our minds see this information. Because now, if I double the width of a coin, I actually quadruple its area. And so now what I've done by using coins to represent this, I have actually squared the size difference. And so rather than being maybe 10 times the size, I'm now 100 times the size. And so it's a way of manipulating information. Graphs should keep the same scale throughout. Graphs should always start at 0. Don't skip sections. This is rarely done. Most people are going to skip sections or they're going to not start at 0. Several of you did it on your homework. When that's violated, the gap should be very clearly indicated that you have skipped over stuff. And some of you did that, and I appreciate that. But it should be very, very clear that, hey, look, we changed the scale. At this point, we jumped, we cut out 50% or whatever to kind of be able to zoom in on the information. Bar graphs should have the same width, or the line should have the same thickness of line if you're using a line graph. Using different widths create a psychological association with the area, and therefore it can be misleading. When we look at survey questions, there are different types of surveys, different types of questionnaires. First of all, interviews. An interview is when someone in person asks the question, or they do it over the phone. In-person questionnaires tend to be a lot more true because people tend to tell the truth in person much more than they would over the phone, much more they would over the internet. And so sometimes that's not true. Sometimes they actually lie more depending on what the type of question is. So there's also self-administered questionnaires, which are sent out by mail or you do them on the computer. I get some from the National Republic Convention. We all got a survey this year from the U.S. Census Bureau that was given by mail and had to use a computer to do it. Questions should be well worded to avoid bias. This is constant. Almost every questionnaire that I get from a specific entity asks questions that have a bias. Right? So let me give you some contrast so you can compare. Here is a good question. Do you favor a waiting period before guns are sold? It's very simple. It's very concise. It doesn't use confusing wording. When that question was asked, 91% of the respondents said yes. 6% said no. And of course, you have another 3% roughly that probably didn't have any opinion one way or the other. If we change that question to state this, do you favor a national gun registration program costing 20% of all dollars spent on crime control? Well, it's much longer, and there's a lot more information in there that is going to prod people to answer a certain way. Right? National gun registration program, okay, that's not a big deal. costing 20% of all dollars spent on crime control? Whoa, now we're talking money. Now we're talking, is this going to increase my taxes? More than likely, yes. Is this going to increase the cost of certain items? Yes. And so now people are associating that question with a dollar amount that is going to impact them. So same question, just worded differently, but look at the respondents. 37% said yes instead of 91%. 61% said no instead of just 6%. That's a tenfold increase. And then you still have about 2% that don't know how to respond. Biased questions. Right? This is one that I've taken off of several of my National Republican Convention surveys. Several years back, when Obama was in office, it says, do you agree with Obama and other liberal Democrats that, and then fill in whatever the blank is. Well, they are asking Republicans, registered Republicans, this question. And so they are going to get biased results because immediately Republicans are against most Democratic ideas. And so, do you agree with the Democrats that we ought to do this? Well, the fact that it's a Democrat that's saying that, chances are I'm going to answer no as a Republican. However, if I'm sending this out to Democrats, then I'm going to more than likely agree with it, regardless of what it is. If I just asked, do you believe that we ought to have, more gun control, I'm going to get different answers. However, if I say, do you agree with the Democrats that we ought to increase the amount of gun control? Well, if I'm a Republican, my natural bent is going to say no, simply because the Democrats agree to it. Therefore, I'm going to be adverse to it. It's kind of like the American Civil Liberties Union. Pretty much whatever the ACLU stands for, I'm probably against. That's kind of my default. Now, I'm kind of an unusual person in that I understand that these questions, how they're asked and why they're asked a certain way. And so I tend to think about it with more of a discerning eye, which is what I want you to be able to do. But even with me looking at the information and trying to filter out the junk that's in that question, even I am probably still affected a little bit by the way the question is asked. Using confusing words in questions. Here's an example. Do you think that people would live longer if they were on a diet? Now, you may not think that's all that confusing, but the word diet means different things to different people. Well, is that diet just like a low calorie diet? Is it a low sodium diet? Is it a low cholesterol diet? What exactly do they mean by diet? Are we talking about a diet that's just fruit and vegetables? Are we talking about a diet that is low in sugars? What kind of diet are we talking about? Now, most people would answer, yeah, I think people would live longer if they were on a diet. But technically speaking, the word diet simply means what you eat. So I'm on a diet. It's my diet is whatever I want to eat. That's what I eat. So whatever my wife fixes, that's what I eat. That's my diet. Right? So am I going to live longer because I'm on that diet? No. But people have a different idea on what they mean by diet. Asking what we call double-barreled questions. Here's an example. Are you in favor of a national health care program, and do you think it should be subsidized by a special tax? Well, that's really two questions. They should break that up into two questions. Are you in favor of a national healthcare program? And then the second question, do you think that healthcare program should be subsidized by tax dollars? So two different questions, because if I agree with a national healthcare program, I may think differently on how that healthcare program should be paid for. So by combining those two questions, you've probably seen this in some true and false questions, even in school. And you're like, well, I like that aspect, but I don't like that aspect. And I've got to choose one or the other. Well, if those were broken up, I would choose different for each piece. And so you've got to be careful about asking some of these double-barreled questions. Using double negatives. In English, you're told not to use them, and here's why. Right? Do you feel that it's not appropriate to have areas where people cannot smoke? That's a confusing question. All right. What is it really asking? I'm going to have to read that question several times. Do you feel that it is not appropriate? Okay, so do you feel that it's inappropriate to have areas where people cannot smoke? So really what they're asking is, do you think it's wrong to have non-smoking areas? Okay, that is the question. That would be a better way of asking a question. Do you feel that it is wrong to have non-smoking areas? Or do you feel that it is right to have smoking and non-smoking areas? You need to ask questions to where they're less confusing. And then there are also other factors. Is the survey anonymous? If the survey is anonymous, you're probably going to get more truthful answers. Just think about some of the surveys that you may have had to take, even at school. I mean, if I sent out a survey to everyone in the school and you wrote your name on it, and I asked you questions like, do you have a problem with watching inappropriate material on TV or on the internet? Do you have a problem with cheating? How often do you cheat throughout the year? How often do you cheat on homework? Well, if you have your name on that, chances are if you have problems with those areas, you're going to lie because you don't want to get in trouble. However, if it's anonymous, you're more likely, if you know that it is going to be anonymous. I mean, if they're just having you fill out a sheet of paper where you're just circling something and you're not putting your name on it and it's just a circle so they can't even compare your handwriting or anything like that, you're probably much more likely to answer that question truthfully if you are putting your survey in a box of some sort that's going to get mixed up so you're not even necessarily handing it to somebody. uh, you're going to be truthful with that. Are the questions open-ended? Open-ended questions are great. They give more information. If you've taken surveys from like Chick-fil-A or whatever, and they ask you these questions where they're rating, and then they typically have an open-ended question like, why do you think we have great service? Or why do what reason do you have for saying this? And they're looking for words, they're looking for phrases, they're looking for what your thoughts are. The time and the location of the survey. Timing is important. If I'm in a hurry, I'm probably not going to answer the survey effectively. If the survey is too long, eventually I get tired of taking the survey. So when I get calls, I don't mind taking surveys, but when I get calls on surveys, I ask a couple of different questions. First of all, how long is this going to take? I want to know how long the survey is. If they say 5 minutes, I'm expecting 10 minutes. Okay, I just kind of double the time because they lie regularly in order to get people to answer their survey. It's wrong, and I don't like it, and I tell them I don't like it, and I think that they're dishonest, and I give them 5 minutes. I've actually set timers before where I'm like, okay, you have 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, I'm done. Okay, so the time, also the location. Is the location appropriate? Are we standing out in the sun in the heat where it makes it uncomfortable, where I'm just going to want to try to get through the survey as quickly as possible, and toward the end I may not even be listening to what they're asking. I want to get done with it. So there are lots of things that we can do to misrepresent statistics. The important factors that I want you to think about is when you are doing information, how are you representing that information? I want you to represent that information honestly, regardless of the outcome. You need to be honest with what you're representing. And it can be hard sometimes because our natural bent is to want us to get people to think the way we are thinking or to make us look better. And secondly, when you watch the news, I encourage you to do this as you watch the news. Now, not a whole lot of you probably watch the national news or even the local news very often, but when you do, whenever they show statistics in some form, think critically. Why did they word it that way? Why did they show the graph that particular way? Why did they use a circle graph instead of a bar graph? Why did they use a bar graph instead of a circle graph? All of those things are used specifically to get information so that they can get you to think the same way they want you to think. So be discerning. At this point, we are done. This is the last lesson. So I hope you've enjoyed the topics that we've covered throughout this year. I have enjoyed teaching you. I wish we could have been together here in the last month and a half or so, but God's in control. Uh, I wish you all well for those of you who are going off to college. I will encourage you to do your best in everything that you do. For those of you who are juniors, they're going to be back next year. I will enjoy teaching you again if you have me for one of the science classes or something. If not, I will enjoy seeing you around campus in the year to come.